Scary telling.
I woke up to the sound of silence. The world was empty, and I was alone. I got up and looked around, but there was no one in sight. It was as if everyone had vanished into thin air. I walked out of my house and into the street. The buildings were empty, and the cars were abandoned. There were no signs of life anywhere. It was like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. I started to panic. What had happened? Where had everyone gone? Was I the only human left on the planet? I couldn't wrap my head around it. As I walked through the deserted city, memories flooded my mind. Memories of my wife and son, who I had lost to the fungal apocalypse. Memories of my friends and neighbors who had also succumbed to the disease. I felt a deep sense of sadness and despair. I was all alone in the world, and there was no one left to share it with. The silence was suffocating. I walked for what felt like hours, but I didn't come across a single living soul. The world was empty, and I was the only one left. As I continued to wander, I began to realize that there was no going back. The world as I knew it was gone, and I was the only one left to bear witness to its destruction. I found myself wishing that I had died with the others. At least then I wouldn't have to face this new world alone. But that wasn't an option. I was still alive, and I had to keep going. As the sun began to set, I found a small park and decided to rest there for the night. I lay down on a bench and looked up at the stars. The sky was clear, and the stars were shining bright. For a moment, I forgot about the emptiness and loneliness of the world. I was filled with a sense of wonder and awe at the beauty of the universe. But as I closed my eyes, the memories came flooding back. Memories of the people I had lost and the world that had been destroyed. I realized that I was alone, and there was no going back. The silence of the world was my only companion, and I was the last human on Earth. The next morning, I set out to continue my journey. The streets were still empty, and the silence was deafening. As I walked, I started to notice something strange. There were green growths on the walls and the ground, and some of the buildings looked like they were covered in moss. I couldn't figure out what it was, but it made me uneasy. The world was already empty and lifeless, and now it seemed like it was slowly being taken over by something else. As I continued to walk, I heard a strange noise. It was a low growl, almost like an animal. I looked around, but there was nothing in sight. I tried to ignore it and keep moving, but the growling continued. I turned a corner and saw a figure in the distance. It was moving slowly, and I couldn't make out what it was. As I got closer, I realized that it was a person, but they looked different. Their skin was covered in a green fungus, and their eyes were completely white. I froze in fear. This person was not like me. They were infected with whatever was taking over the world. The infected person started to walk towards me, and I knew I had to get away. I turned and started to run in the opposite direction, my heart racing. As I ran, I heard more growling and saw more infected people. They were everywhere. It was like the world had been taken over by these creatures. I found a small alley and hid there, hoping that the infected people wouldn't find me. But I could hear them getting closer and closer. I closed my eyes and tried to calm my breathing. I knew that I had to stay quiet and still if I wanted to survive. After what felt like an eternity, the growling stopped. I opened my eyes and peeked out of the alley. The infected people were gone. I didn't know what to do. I was alone in a world full of monsters. I had to keep moving if I wanted to survive, but I didn't know where to go or what to do. I started to walk again, my eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. The green growths were everywhere now, and I realized that they were the same fungus that was on the infected people. As I walked, I tried to come up with a plan. I knew that I couldn't outrun the infected people forever, but I had to find a way to survive. But the more I thought about it, the more hopeless it seemed. The world was full of infected people, and I was the only human left. I was a sitting duck. As the sun began to set, I found a small abandoned house and decided to rest there for the night. But I couldn't sleep. The fear of the infected people finding me and the memories of the people I had lost kept me awake. I knew that I had to keep moving if I wanted to survive, but I didn't know how much longer I could keep going. The world was full of monsters, and I was alone. I woke up the next morning, feeling more tired than when I went to sleep. My dreams had been plagued by visions of the infected people and memories of the people I had lost. As I started to walk again, I realized that my body felt different. It was like something was growing inside me. I looked down at my arms and saw strange green growths on my skin. I panicked. Was I infected too? I tried to shake it off and keep walking, but the fear of the unknown consumed me. What if I was turning into one of them? What if the fungus had taken hold of me? The more I thought about it, the more I started to see things that weren't there. Shadows moved in the corners of my eyes, and I heard whispers on the wind. I couldn't tell if they were real or just my imagination. As I walked, the green growths on my body started to spread. I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. It was like the fungus was taking over my body, and I was helpless to stop it. At night, the nightmares came. They were vivid and terrifying, filled with visions of the infected people and memories of my past life. I couldn't escape them, and they consumed me. During the day, I saw more and more infected people. It was like they were everywhere, watching me from the shadows. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. The silence and emptiness of the world were driving me crazy, and the fear of the infected people and the fungus inside me was too much to bear. But I had to keep going. I had to find a way to survive. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that I couldn't give up. As I walked, I found an abandoned laboratory. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, but I decided to take a chance and explore it. Inside, I found research notes and samples of the fungus. It was like nothing anyone had ever seen before. The notes talked about how the fungus had taken control of the infected people's minds and bodies, making them climb to the highest point they could find before dying. I realized that this was what had happened to my wife and son. They had climbed to the rooftop of our house before they died. The more I read, the more I realized that there was no cure. The fungus had taken over the world, and there was no going back. I felt a deep sense of despair. I was alone, infected, and doomed to die. The world was full of monsters, and there was no escape. The nightmares continued, and the visions of the infected people and the fungus inside me consumed me. I knew that I was losing my mind, but there was nothing I could do about it. As I walked, I saw a figure in the distance. It was an infected person, but this one was different. It was covered in more fungus than any of the others, and it had a strange aura about it. I froze in fear. This was it. I was going to die here, alone and infected. The infected person started to walk towards me, and I knew that there was no escaping it. But as it got closer, something strange happened. The fungus on its body started to wither and die, and the infected person fell to the ground, dead. I didn't know what to make of it, but I knew that it meant something. Maybe there was a way to fight back against the fungus. Maybe there was a way to survive. But I knew that it wouldn't be easy. The world was full of monsters, and I was alone. But maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. The death of the infected person filled me with a sense of hope. Maybe there was a way to fight back against the fungus and survive. I had to find a way. I continued to walk, my eyes scanning the surroundings for any clues. The green growths on my body were spreading, but I tried to ignore them. I couldn't give up. As I walked, I remembered the research notes I had found in the laboratory. They talked about how the infected people had climbed to the highest point they could find before they died. I realized that maybe that was the key. Maybe there was something at the top of a high point that could cure the fungus or give me some answers. I decided to climb the same hill that I had climbed before. It was a steep and treacherous climb, but I knew that I had to do it. I had to find a way to survive. As I climbed, I saw more and more of the green fungus growing out of my body. It was like it was trying to take over me completely. But I kept climbing, my hands and feet bloody and bruised from the climb. I was determined to find a way to survive. As I got closer to the top of the hill, I saw more and more of the infected people. They were still climbing towards the sunlight, their eyes completely white. I tried to avoid them, but some of them were too close. I could see the fungus growing out of their eyes, and it filled me with a deep sense of dread. But I kept climbing, my determination growing with every step. I had to find a way to survive. Finally, I reached the top of the hill. It was a small clearing, and there was a beam of sunlight shining down on it. It was like a ray of hope in the darkness. As I looked around, I saw hundreds of dead bodies on top of each other. It was like a hill made of death. I tried not to look at them, but I saw my son's body among them. It filled me with a deep sense of sadness and despair. But I knew that I had to keep going. I had to find a way to survive. As I looked around, I saw strange green growths on the bodies. It was like the fungus had completely taken over them. I realized that this was the end. There was no cure, no way to fight back against the fungus. The world was full of monsters, and I was infected. As my vision started to fade away, I saw the green growths on my own body. I knew that I was going to die here, alone and infected. But as my last breath left my body, I felt a strange sense of peace. The world was empty, and I was the last human on Earth. But maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for the future. I woke up to the sound of silence. The world was empty, and I was alone. But something was different. The green growths on my body were gone, and I felt renewed. I looked around, and everything was different. The buildings were no longer abandoned, and the streets were no longer empty. It was like a new beginning. As I walked through the city, I saw signs of life everywhere. People were rebuilding, and the world was slowly coming back to life. I realized that I had been given a second chance. I had survived the fungal apocalypse, and now I could help rebuild the world. I found a group of survivors and joined them in their mission to rebuild. We worked tirelessly, day and night, to restore the world to its former glory. It wasn't easy, but we persevered. We built new homes, started new farms, and worked together to create a new civilization. As we worked, I realized that the fungal apocalypse had been a wake-up call. It had shown us the fragility of life and the importance of working together to build a better world. The memories of the people I had lost still haunted me, but they also motivated me to keep going. I knew that they would be proud of what we were building. As the years went by, the world continued to thrive. We had learned from our mistakes and had created a society that valued life, community, and cooperation. I realized that the world was no longer empty, and I was no longer alone. I was surrounded by people who had gone through the same struggles as me, and together, we had created a new beginning. As I looked out at the city, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I had been given a second chance, and I had made the most of it. The world was full of hope, and I knew that the future was bright. We had survived the fungal apocalypse, and we had built a better world because of it.